My life's mission, this work, is just to liberate people's souls so that they can go about living the purpose that they were created.
I dealt with shame and anger that came out in my house. My kids, because of the repair that's been created, they don't remember having an angry dad at all.
That's my real goal as a leader, is to get these two people who have different opinions and want me to be the judge. I don't want to be the judge. I just need to be the person that can bring these two divisions together and form the and. I knew if this one little thing was causing me shame, I was going to have shame triggers all the time about it. So just punching it in the face and saying we can do it. Every time I'm throwing around weight in the gym, or every time that I didn't really want to get up at 4:30 in the morning and drag myself there, or go at 4:30 in the afternoon when I'm exhausted after a day. I just kept thinking to myself, you've got to prove it to that little boy.
Welcome back to Flipping the Lid, everybody. You know what we do here, and I love the real raw conversations that we have with pretty much every single guest. We're normalizing conversations that aren't typically being had in different parts of the world, and today, this guest is going to bring it. I know this because he's already been on our other show, and we were able to go very deep, very quickly, and his ability to hang there, both intellectually and emotionally, was quite impressive. He is a father and a husband, and the fact that he identifies as that right out of the gate, I have to call attention to, because he's also an unbelievable leader as it relates to helping bring others into their power and potential. And through his organization, Conjunction Leadership, and the approach with which he takes, all comes from the stories of his life and the studies and applications of the lessons that he's learned. So, Jim, I can't wait to jump in with you today, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It's good to be back.
Well, it is. It's good to have you here on the long form podcast, because the 15 minutes with you just was not enough. And so I really appreciate you being willing to come in and jump in and dive a little bit deeper. And so you'll probably expect this question, because it's the only question I ask every guest on both shows, but it comes out different typically when people are on both. I gave a little descriptor based on who you are, some of the things that you've done, but who are you in your words?
Yeah, it's a good one. And it always makes me sit back and reflect. I mean, I identify as a husband first, a father. And I liken it to my life's mission's work is just to liberate people's souls so that they can go about living the purpose that they were created. I happen to do that in an executive coaching setting, but in reality it's the same as if I were talking to someone on the street too.
Yeah. What does it mean to you to liberate someone's soul?
I don't know. I mean, it's a long journey, right? I can only tell you from my perspective.
Yeah.
It's like when you tap into that place that's so near and dear to you, but you're so afraid that it's gonna bring hurt or pain or make you different or unique or weird from the rest of the world. When you actually live into that and you realize that thing that you thought made you weird is the thing that makes you actually stand out. It's the thing you were put here to do. It's the thing that you could do longer and harder and think about more than anyone else. Even if it drains your body, it energizes your soul. That's what it means. It means that more people are actually living according to that, rather than a lot of the social conventions or the fear of missing out, or even just an obligation to provide. I mean, those are all valid reasons for doing some of the things people do, but they're not really maximizing like the circles of the Venn diagram where everything just connects right in the center. So
yeah, I really like how you described that. So it also makes me want to lean right in. What's the one thing that you were weird for growing up that's actually your superpower?
Yeah, it's so weird to think about this, because growing up, I don't know that many of us do, but I didn't pay attention to it. But I was always magnetized to clubs and activities and groups of people coming together. And then I would get so frustrated because some of them fell short of their intended outcome. The way the meeting was organized, or the way the sessions were put together, or it just wasted so many people's time when it could have been such a maximized effort. In corporate America, then, as I went through my journey, I ended up in training and development, leadership coaching, leadership spaces. But a lot of times I found myself like putting together the agendas for meetings. It was the thing that I absolutely hated, but it's also the thing that I couldn't stand to let someone else do, because they were gonna build it based upon their outcomes, which was fine, but they weren't gonna build it based upon humans coming together to get those outcomes and allowing us to socialize or be human in that interaction. So, the timed agenda that says we have 5 minutes for this and 10 minutes for this, and they move methodically through the agenda, and yes, outcomes got done, but dead bodies were all in the wake.
Yeah.
And so the thing that made me weird was just constantly thinking about it from a design perspective of how do we maximize this thing called human potential, even as we gather. How do we be more human and relational to one another while we get good work done? And I kept putting those tensions together, and I found myself like repulsed when someone would ask me to put the agenda together. But I also found myself like, nobody else is going to think about it like this, so let me just do this, right? Instead of wasting my time in that meeting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you just hit on too, I just outlined so many meetings that exist in this world, right? I mean, think about every prospect meeting that any salesperson has ever had. And the prospect is preconditioned to expect that they're driving to get a second meeting to potentially try to sell them something. And they walk into it anticipating the need to defend instead of be open and connect as a human, right? And so even what you just outlined, it's funny. It's like that was one of my most profound shifts as it related to my own leadership, my own sales, was detaching from any and all outcomes and trying to maintain a high level of intent for the other person on the other side, right? And the only way to do that is if I'm abundant in the way that I view the world and the opportunities, because then it's not a zero-sum game. Yes. But unfortunately, everyone, I think, is conditioned to believe that we only have so much time, we only have so many opportunities. And so everything is outcomes focused to the point that, to your point, we lose the connection with ourselves and each other.
Yes.
When ultimately, people are the ones that drive the profit, right? And the impact in those people's lives is what ultimately allows the income to follow. So beautifully articulated. How early in your life were you able to identify the distinction between outcomes-based agendas, and I mean this more broadly, not just in meetings, versus kind of the connecting elements of humanity that will ultimately allow us to bring ourselves together to create the outcomes that the agendas attempt to?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I had words to describe it, but I would say it was very, very early, like sitting in classrooms even and watching the way teachers were trying to instruct us. It was just like my head would explode sometimes. And I'd be like, this is just not working for the most of the kids here. I mean, that's why we all have to come in for extra tutoring or go home with homework, is because we're not getting it done in the classroom.
That's right.
I didn't know what I was feeling. I just felt like, okay, I don't want to be a teacher and I don't want to do it that way. And then I thought I was attracted to science. So I that was the topic that I liked the most. So I went to college and I became a scientist. But during college, I was sitting in the same situations, and my only escape was to join like extracurricular social clubs in the evening and be part of that. And then I would sit in those meetings and I would be like, this could be so good only if, right? Only if. And then I found myself leading these teams and leading these clubs and leading these organizations. And it just became natural that my bent was around leadership, and it really didn't matter if it was in science or not. So my career took a whole new trajectory just following that path. So,
well, I mean, it sounds to me like you've really followed people, right? And using that as kind of its never-ending connecting fiber for you in your life. It's, by the way, not in any way dissimilar to the way that I view it. People ask me, they're like, Brian, like, what are you an expert in? And I'm like, well, people.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that I know it all by any means, but it means I've studied it extensively and I know people, which also means I can know business, I can know philanthropy, I can know community, I can know, right? Because what is the connecting fiber with everything in our world? It's people. And yet our world has gotten lost and focuses on other things. Why do you think that is? What do you think about humanity and our human experience that we create all this resistance and interference for seemingly no purpose?
Boy, that is a big, like a $1 million question, and wrapped up into a very few sentences. But
well, I mean, you disrupt, bridge, and grow, bro. I was just hoping you'd bring it, right? I think you have the answer.
I think some of those spaces just make us so inherently uncomfortable. We don't know what to do with it. And so as humans, as creatures of habit, we default to where we feel comfort. And we can control the world of business. We can control the organizational structure. We can control so many things. And so the world of comfort draws us back to feeling like we're in control. But when we're in this messy middle, dealing with other humans and trying to connect in a world that's upside down, and we've got diverse viewpoints all across the way, so much of that brings up this feeling of being out of control. Like, I'm out of control in my own body. I'm out of control with myself. I'm out of control in relationship with other people. And when I feel out of control, what do? I just default over here and let's just control business because it's easy, right?
Yeah.
Let's just control other people because that's easy. If I can shut them down or minimize them or stop them from talking or stop them from acting this way, then the world will go back to peace and I'll be in control.
Yeah.
But in reality is the sooner you realize you're not in control, the better off you be, right? So,
well, I mean, it's also where real freedom is. It's interesting because typically fear and shame breed control, right? Now, you use the word comfort. I often look at control driving towards safety.
yes.
Right. And often what I mean by that is intellectual and emotional safety. And so you may mean the same thing, but in the chance that you didn't, I'd love it if you could describe maybe the difference between comfort and safety as it relates to either how we receive control or in general.
Yeah, I think I see it very similarly. I often use the analogy with my clients, like, a ship is actually safest in the harbor when it's moored to the pier, right? And it's sitting there and people can admire it, and certainly you could walk on it, but a ship wasn't designed to be moored to the pier. It was designed to go across the ocean and carry its cargo or its passengers. If it goes across the ocean blue, God knows when a storm is going to come or an iceberg's going to hit or something terrible is going to happen, but it's only living its purpose when it's out there where it's unknown and volatile and uncertain. It's not where the safety or security or comfort level is coming, right? So I'd see it the same way.
One and the same, analogy. Which is, so we were speaking the same language, but I did pick up on the specific nuance of the word choice that you chose. And I understand why you did that as well. So I think that's really beautiful. You've studied extensively, obviously, physiology, behavior. You've got a master's in both. You have done this by virtue of interest, your natural draw and tendency to be towards people and see a process for connecting people to create structures and ultimately drive towards growth and outcome. It is leadership by bucket, but to also fully understand the context of all of what you teach, it often means that there's experiences within your own life that have been void or there was a gap in those same areas at some point. What about your story, your childhood, your early on life, do you feel you've used as fuel or perspective to be able to continue yourself down this path? And what got you started?
Yeah, what got me started? Well, the name of my business is Conjunction. We'll start there. And it popped into my head once when I was just working with a business coach, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, frustrated in corporate America, pounding it out in the woods. The existential question popped into my head, like, do I want to do this or do I want to do that, right? And it was this kind of either or mindset. That when that popped out, I realized how often my brain did that in the midst of uncertainty or volatility. It was splitting into these extreme opposites. And then I reflected back. I never, ever made wise choices when it was in those extreme opposites.
Ever. Yeah.
The only time that I ever made wise choices was when I took a pause or a breath and tried to figure out what was in the middle. And then I realized it was my life story. I was a middle child. I have an older sister and a younger brother. Choosing games or playmates, whatever it was, I never liked to choose one or the other. I wanted us all three to play together. I told you I went to school for science, but I also like this people thing. And I was like, do I do science or do I do people? And then I was like, I don't know. I chose science, but that didn't feel wise. So then I figured out how to work in science with people. And I chose the and in that one. There were so many examples. I grew up in a rural environment on a farm, but I went to a more city school. And I was like, who am I? Am I a rural kid? Am I a farm kid? Or am I a city kid? Which group do I associate with and find belonging? But somewhere in the middle, I just kind of had to put on my boots and also go to ball games, right? There were also times when I wanted to play sports, but I wanted to be in these leadership activities. Both of my coaches and both of these things were telling me, you got to go full bore into one or the other. You can't do both. And I'm like, but honestly, my intention isn't to make the NBA, and my intention isn't necessarily to be a CEO. It's to be this kind of person in the middle that I want to just live my unique calling. So I don't have to be best at both of those things. I don't have to play AAU ball all summer long. I can also do some of these other things, and I put them together. That was the precipitous heartache that I didn't really know as heartache at the time. I just thought I was making choices in my life. But looking back at it, I'm like, I've always been the person that chose the and. And as I started studying leadership with other leaders, I could see that was what the trajectory was between those who thrived and those who dived. Those that got succumbed to the overly execution focused mindset, their brain was just splitting things left and right. You got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. And they felt that dopamine hit so quick because they could just make the decisions so fast. But it was more of those reflective individuals that said, there are 2 points of view here. maybe there's a third or a fourth or a fifth option if we put both of those together. And instead of making the decision, they pulled people together and said, how would both of you make this decision together? Or how would all of you? It really became crystal clear to me. It was like one of those moments when I knew I had to leave corporate America, but I was in the middle of an executive coaching situation with a leader. And he presented very differently that day. He came kind of drawn and tired and frustrated. And I said, well, what's happening? And he looked at me and he said, I'm just tired of splitting the baby. And he was using the biblical example of Solomon, who was always deciding, and two women came to them and said, which is the mother? And well, we'll just split the baby, right? And he said, no matter how often I split the baby, I've always got someone that's upset with me. And I thought back, I reflected back to him and I said, it sounds like you want to make everyone happy. And he's like, yes. And I said, but what is best for all, right? And so he started thinking of his brain. And in that moment, in that time, when he was able to pause and say, I no longer have to split the baby, I just have to get these people talking. That's my real goal as a leader, is to get these two people who have different opinions and want me to be the judge. I don't want to be the judge. I just need to be the person that can bring these two divisions together and form the and. He changed everything about the way that he went about working with people, and his trajectory just exponentially grew. And it was in that moment that I was like, this is what I was meant to do. This is where I need to go. And if people are truly going to trust me, I can't do that on the inside anymore. I've got to do it on the outside. So,
yeah, I also really appreciate the distinction between, kind of internal executive coach and external. There really is a complete difference. And, I want to highlight that that's even one of those things that when I get hired on corporate engagements, right, beyond a keynote or to work with a team or what have you, that's one of the first things that I actually acknowledge out of the gate is I ask, what level of transparency and reporting do they expect back from the coach to the CEO or whoever's making the decision to hire for a collective group? Because I won't share specifics and details, right? I will not. And so if an organization or the person who's going to pay the check has a resistance to that, I don't work for the individual that's deciding to hire. I work for each individual I'm working with and who's in front of me. And the only way to have that autonomy is to make sure that that boundary and expectation is very, very, very clear.
Yes.
I love the way you communicate, Jim, and just the examples that you give. And, even a lot of what you just talked about in that whole process of either or versus and is even the concept of this zero-sum game that so many people operate under in this world, whether it's with time, whether it's with money, whether it's relationships, right? It seems as if there's a finite amount or a belief system amongst a large portion of our population that there's a finite amount, which drives competition, which drives the need to overcome and defeat, right? Versus collaborate collectively. What do you think it is about our physiology, our nervous systems, our behavior as society that has only continued to reinforce this belief that a zero-sum game is all that exists?
I suppose the word love is too small of an answer, but I honestly think that that's where it resides in. Is there are more and more people who grow up without the feeling of love and belonging. And there's more and more people who are on the periphery of loneliness, right? They're not on the inside of connectedness. And I think those things collectively kind of get under our skin a little bit when we feel like we're a lone wolf, or we're not on the inside group, or we don't have love and belonging and we just can be. And so therefore we constantly strive and perform and try to earn, and what we're doing is trying to form these quid pro quo social contracts with everyone around us, that if I perform for you, you'll tell me you love me. You may not say the word love, but what you're probably going to say is, oh, you did a good job on that project. And that's a false pseudonym for love. So I give you more of that. And then I go around and I perform for someone else and they tell me, oh, I appreciate your heroic effort on that. And that's another false pseudonym for love. So I go ahead and repeat that. And pretty soon we're quid pro quoing it with everyone around there rather than just being in our own natural sense. I think that then leads to this feeling of, if I stop performing, I'll stop being loved. So I don't know. I guess that's how.
No,
I
bro,
would
you
put
hit the
it.
nail on the head. The language that you and I use is very, very similar. I mean, dude, it's spot on. I often say, and I was one of them, right? So many high performers in this world learn to receive love, validation, and connection through performance.
Yes.
Right? Everything in terms of worth and connection and love is all contingent upon what we do, which is why my do ratio was through the roof, and all I did was do until I couldn't anymore, right? It's also this really interesting place because it was when I learned to surrender to that. It was when I learned how to just be. The more I realized that the more I could be, the more I am holistically, right? And it also went from a complete different perspective in the sense that I have been surrounded by people my entire life, and most of my life felt lonely.
Yes.
But after I anchored in myself and have gone down the path of healing, I can be alone and never feel lonely.
Amen to that.
And so it's a complete different shift in the way that we operate as humans.
Yes.
And, what I've often said is it makes sense. I mean, we're operating with this archaic nervous system that's designed to anticipate threat, right? And 100 years ago, if you cut your leg, you could die. But that's not the reality in most parts of our world today, though it is still in some. And so what are we actually afraid of? What are we actually reacting to? Perceived threat more often than anything. Almost 99% of the time, it's not even real. Yet we're acting and reacting as if our life is on the line.
Yes.
How do you teach people to start to guide themselves through this process to disrupt, bridge, and grow on their own path, to be able to understand that that's not a way to live? It's not even living.
Yeah. Let me just take a minute to breathe really deeply into all what you just said. I mean, so much of our lived experience, I think, and I'll answer your question with, again, my experience and how I guide other people through it. But tragically, many of us have to start disrupting things once we've fallen and it hurt, right? So I candidly tell people, is the way you're working still working for you? And
that's a great question.
If they can't answer that in the affirmative, then it gives them cause for pause to sit back. Because, if I'm hustling for my worth and I'm trying to strategize, plan, and control my way out of a jam and worry about everything that's not happening, I'll burn myself out. If I'm being also Mr. Overly Nice Guy, pleasing everyone and creating harmony everywhere it goes, but never sharing my own voice, what's going to happen is I neuter my leadership, right? If I'm the person that's overly intellectual and always in my head thinking I have to figure it out all by myself, that's great because you're going to be smarter than a lot of people, but you're going to be lonely as hell too, right? So at some point, that gift of the way that you've learned to show up in the world becomes your weakness or your limitation, your kryptonite almost. And for me, that was it. Like, I grew up kind of with this and mentality, and up to a point, it served me well. I got known for building great teams and putting together good organizations and good organizational structure, designing great meetings. I could get a group of people to come together around a topic better than most. And yet I wasn't satisfied. I didn't know how to speak my voice out in that and say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be in this place. I don't want to climb the ladder that way. And at some point when I got there, we in the personal journey, we had 3 children. We adopted number 4, found out we were expecting number 5. And my career was at the peak of where it should be. The right sponsorship, the right lineup, the right next step, all of that stuff. And I'm sitting in the road in a hotel room by myself going, I'm missing out on everything that I really wanted in this life for the expense of what I think I want. And I couldn't answer that question. The way that I'm working isn't working for me anymore. So what am I going to do about it? And that was the moment when I realized up to that point, I had followed the path of many. I had followed go to school, get a good job, find the house, find the wife, have the kids, do all the things that everyone else does. And that's generally getting you in the right direction. But at some point, you can no longer follow all of the shoulds, or you can no longer follow all of the advice. You have to follow the way that you were designed to live in the world. So with my clients, we go through a very similar background. I take them through a journey of what has informed their opinion of the way the world works. We identify what is their reactive pattern of showing up in this world, and how is that serving them, but how is it limiting them? We identify what value set they're operating under and how it shows up. And I love it when someone tells me, well, my family is my number one value, but their behaviors never line up to it. And I'm like, bingo. I got to call your bluff on that. Your family is not your value. It's an aspiration. But everything else in your life is telling you money is your value, wealth is your value, security is your value, right? So once we get through all of that, they're kind of emotionally disrupted. There's a lot of uncertainty in their life. I love working with midlife leaders because they're already at that spot. They've already got enough understanding, and things start feeling like a little squishy in that space. And instead of going out and having a midlife crisis, what we do is we just pivot and we have a midlife becoming. Like, let's imagine what can happen next. That's the bridging phase, right?
Yeah.
What do you want your world to look like? How do you self-author what you want to see happen rather than waiting for someone else to give it to you, right? And once they get into that space of owning their stuff and making commitments to them, then growth is just the natural outstep of that. But we have to, the only way that I know how to help change corporate cultures is to work with the heart of a leader who's in that disruptive phase themselves and is ready to say, like, I can't keep doing what I'm doing anymore.
Yeah. So beautiful the way that you communicate, my friend. And again, there's so much alignment. You know, when you said in the beginning, you made a statement around how, you know, my career was in the place that it should have been in, right? I have the same belief that I believe you do, even though you didn't say it so directly, because you looped back and you said the shoulds later. Yeah. Almost exclusively, when I hear people say that, I'll challenge them and say should is a shame-based word, right? It's implying whoever you are, whatever you want, it's not good enough, right? It's not your language. It's not your narrative. And so much of even how what you followed it by, you know, there's a process that we go through for actually unpacking the should narratives for a lot of our clients as well. Like, who were you told you should be? What were you told you should want? What were you told you should do? Where were you told you should go and not go, right? Like, all of these things that just ultimately bring full circle clarity around a lot of people don't live their lives based on their own visions, their own beliefs, and their own standards. Most of the people that you and I both work with, I can already tell just in the way you communicate, have never lived their lives for themselves. In fact, many people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s that I've worked with start living their life based on what they want for the very first time because they've never allowed themselves permission. But what I also really appreciate is that you call out lack of congruence within their values and within their actions, right? We say all the time that the world will never judge you based on your intent. The world will always judge you based on your actions. Yep. Right. And so I've said for years, I was a husband and father first. It's the only thing binary in my world. My actions were not always congruent to that statement. They very deeply are today, but they were not always. I was saying it to make myself feel better and believe that I was living the life in alignment with what I wanted. But in reality, I wasn't. Yep. Right. And that unavoidable precursor to change is acceptance of truth. Yep. Right. And until we can have the courage or desire to stand in our truth and understand what it's really pointing us towards, we're never going to be free. Yeah. And you're creating freedom for a lot of people where they're hiring you for executive leadership. That's what they're hiring you for. That's what they believe they want. Right. And what are you doing? You're actually going in and you're helping repair their heart, their soul, their belief systems. You're giving them what they need, which is far beyond the strategy and tactics of their businesses. Correct. How have you learned to navigate the nuance of the needs versus wants within your clients? And I know just in sitting with you, your ability to do this, but what is your process for setting up and creating a safe and protected space so that your clients will actually open to what's possible? Yeah, it's I liken it to two turtles meeting in the middle of the road, right? When we first get in the middle of the road, our heads are both back in our shell because we're not sure if we're going to get pecked off by another one, right? But you just let yourself out a little bit at a time and the other person reciprocates, and pretty soon you're talking with your heads out of your shell. And that's my process is I live on the edge of vulnerability, which is something that I had to learn. I grew up kind of feeling like if I shared my feelings too much, it wasn't a safe spot for me to do that growing up. If I shared it too much, my masculinity even might be judged, right? So I learned pretty quickly to keep most of that stuff shoved behind my shell. But with my clients, I also recognize in this entrepreneurial world, I don't want to work with everybody. I only want to work with the few people who are going to resonate with me, but they can't resonate with me if they don't know me. And so I have to live on the edge of vulnerability and let more people than this comfortable into some of my mess and my message so that's who I attract in this journey. This midlife leadership space is not for the faint of heart. And I think you could probably coach someone if you weren't in midlife or haven't gone through it
I don't know that you would be able to empathize with them quite the same. And for me, I don't tell them what to do. Certainly, I don't have the prescription for their life.
Yep.
But when they're wrestling with, or when they're on the edge of talking about how destabilizing it feels and how they can't stay up all night like they used to, and they can't hustle as much as it was, and they have to put their phone on bigger font type because their eyes don't work as much, right? Okay, they're reacting to everything they're losing, and I understand that because I did too.
Yeah.
What I can say is, it sounds like you're reacting to what you're losing. What yet do you have to gain, right?
Yeah.
So you don't need to look at your phone as much. Throw it away. So you don't need to be up all night. Don't, right? Your brain is going to work better and different because now you can use all the collective wisdom you gained rather than trying to amass huge amounts of knowledge, right? And if I can paint a vision for them that what is coming next is even better than what they're leaving behind, what they're going to do is say, I want to get to that place faster.
Yeah.
How do I do that? So how do I help people get to that space? I mean, it's a little bit of modeling, and it's a lot of just reminding them that they're not missing out. They're really not. Like, they think they might be missing out. Corporate America might make them feel like they're old.
Yep.
They might feel like the next best thing is to live on a golf course for the rest of their life. But I'm like, you've given me enough indication so far that you're not a person that just sits still. I don't know why you think that that's going to be helpful later on in life, right? So,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, what I also appreciate, though, is though you didn't say it so directly, you're not stating anything other than asking questions and reflecting back what you're seeing.
Yes.
Right. That's not much different than what I do from a coaching perspective.
Nope.
It's to open myself enough to receive what I need to from them, share enough of myself so that they can feel the relatability, but also recognize like that I'm a human, right? I'm
Yes.
here alongside with them. And it's not a place of sympathy or direction or judgment or criticism. It's a place of understanding.
Yes.
And how hard and miserable it can be. And so you're getting people to think and feel, but what you're really teaching them to do is to think and feel.
Yes.
By the questions that you ask and the prompts that you give, because that's something that is not taught in our society. We're not taught how to think. We're not taught how to feel. And we're certainly not taught how to think about our thinking, feel our feeling, feel our thinking, or feel our like it's just, it doesn't happen, right? Like we don't go through that same type of process in the way that we do things.
Yeah.
You know, your and my stories are obviously very similar, but very different. I love the language that you use. I will tell you that when I realized that it was time for me to hire my first coach was about 12 or 13 years ago. It was a place where I'd kind of reached where I felt like I didn't have the knowledge, expertise, or wisdom to kind of do it for myself. And since then, I've not had a singular period of time since I haven't had at least one coach.
Yes.
Right? Because I have blind spots, and what I'm really good at for doing for other people comes from my own experience, my own frameworks, my own understanding, but that doesn't mean I can do it for myself in every situation, right? And so I need that for my own personal development and growth. Where has the role of coaching and mentorship played a role in your life? And what's your belief system or desire around receiving outside coaching to continue yourself and your own development?
Yeah. It's been an evolution, right? Though I was in sales for a while, and so I led a sales team. And I used to believe that coaching was helping those salespeople be better salespeople.
Yeah.
I used to believe that coaching was, here's your rubric, here's your standard, you got a 5 here and a 4 there, here's where you need to improve, right? That was my definition of coaching, was judgment-based coaching.
Performance-based is what I would traditionally call that, right?
Yep.
And so, again, it's outcomes-based. Beautiful distinction.
And for me, that was the last thing I wanted to place myself under, right? And I also see this with a lot of the, particularly men who will want coaching, come to me for coaching, but reject the offer of coaching eventually.
Yep.
And the reason, I settle with it because so many of us were raised, and I'll just use the example of sports coaching, right? Where if you didn't do the work and you knew you didn't do the work, you showed up at practice and the judge or the coach benched you. Or the coach pulled you from the team, or worse, the coach called you out in front of all the other guys, right?
Yeah.
So this male-to-male shame factor that we feel when we didn't hold our own commitment is so great that oftentimes we don't want to place ourselves under that judgment.
Yep.
We don't want to put ourselves back into a situation where someone else is going to call us out against our own commitment that we already feel shame over, right?
Yep.
And honestly, most coaches don't know how to do it without shame.
Fact. I'm so happy you said that.
And so where I came from was, I don't really want coaching, but I'll have some advisors around me, right? I need a financial advisor because I don't want to pay attention to my 401k, and I probably need somebody who's a little bit ahead in their career. So I need a career advisor for me. But it wasn't until I hit this spot where so many things felt destabilizing. I was sitting in that hotel room thinking, why am I here when my family is back at home? How do I reconcile this? I was raised in an entrepreneurial family, but here I am, this corporate rat. Like, I'm running the race. And there were so many things there. At the same time, I had just turned 40 something-ish. And I felt like a lot of my faculties were starting to wane, right? It took me longer to recover after workouts, and I had to manage my diet better. And I was reacting to everything that I feared losing. I'm running the race so that I can earn a bigger paycheck, so that I can run the race even harder and miss out on more stuff, right? When I sit back into that space, I was like, I really don't know where I'm going. I don't know what to do next. That's when coaching took on a new life for me, because I found somebody who wasn't shame-based and just started exploring those questions. What would you be doing if you weren't doing this? And why would you be doing that? And what would that mean to you if you did? And how would your future be different if you could? And suddenly I started seeing that this world of entrepreneurism and all the experience that I had built up already wasn't for naught. It could actually fit together in the end. Like, all of my life up to this point had been an internship. All of my life up to this point had just been about gaining experience, not about climbing the ladder. Now I had the experience and I had the contact base. I had the relationships with people. And as soon as I started telling people, I think this is what I'm going to go do, I'm going to go do this, they're like, you should totally do that. That is totally you. So I have a fitness coach today. I have a business coach today. I have a kind of what I would call a mindset coach, just keeping my head on straight, an entrepreneurial coach. And then I have a huge set of a board of advisors, people that I don't know, QuickBooks isn't my friend, so who helps me with my QuickBooks? And I have a board of advisors on other things. And, I place myself in those situations where I would have previously felt or feared judgment. And now I willingly sit there because I know the commitment was never to them in the first place. It was always to me. I bet on myself when I made this journey. I bet on myself when I said I can go into business. I didn't say how, because God knows none of us really know how when we go into business. What we do is we bet on the vision. We bet on us. We bet on the talents and the innate abilities and the intuition that's been birthed into us from the very beginning. And we just let the rest of it figure itself out.
I think obviously entrepreneurship is also not for the faint of heart, right? And I would tell you that just the process of being an entrepreneur, in fact, I would say being an entrepreneur and being a father are probably the two greatest situations that have caused growth in my life outside of everything else. And so I'd love it if you could speak to your experience around both of those as well, right? Like this transition from, as you call a corporate rat, right, to chasing your dream, to coach and create impact in the way that you desire. What did that transition and that process cause and force for you to see more clearly in yourself? What came to the surface? And, maybe what's one of the greatest lessons you've learned in that transition? And then I don't want to layer on too many elements to this question, but I think you can follow the framing. It's ultimately this entrepreneurship coaching platform versus being a father. And how did those two cause you to grow?
I'll just, let me put a headline above both of those, and I'll say that any growth is first personal growth, right? And so we'll just take entrepreneurism first. Like, I was a student of leadership in a corporate setting for 25 years. I saw leaders of all sorts in organizations of all different sizes. And, it wasn't, I felt like I had a lot of knowledge, and I felt like I should be, again, shame-based words, I should be the best leader possible. Like, why can't I build this business? Yet there was a lot of fear and insecurity between these 2 years, right? Like, am I smart enough? Do I have what it takes? Can I actually do this? Can I go hunt for clients while I work with clients? And can I manage a business while I also work in the business? And, oh my gosh, what about paying my own taxes and buying my own insurance and all of the things that would draw me back to safety or comfort, right? When you are literally faced with those, and you are also have the obligation of feeding your family and keeping a roof over your head, you just figure it out because you bet on yourself, right? You say, I am smart enough to figure this out. And there are times when I stand in front of the mirror and I tell myself that. Like, it doesn't mean I have to figure it out by myself, though. That's the big distinction is I am smart enough to figure this out. And Brian is a dude that's smarter than me at this. And I'm going to call him and I'm going to place myself in a situation where I can be coachable and teachable and say, here's my challenge. Same thing with a family, right? I think it was probably my kids. I have 5 of them. I remember number 1 and number 2, I was so worried about messing him up. I was going to be the perfect dad. And I had all the books and all the play, this is what we're going to do. We're going to end up wrapping up every day with a lesson and a leadership, and we're going to have a devotion, and we're going to do and I did all the things. And then I realized they're still reflecting my bad behavior.
Yes.
Right? I hadn't changed myself. I had just changed my actions to be a better dad. But, maybe the act of exasperation when I got really frustrated, or maybe the way I'd stomp my foot down, or the way I'd speak to my wife, they were picking up on those things and they were repeating it. And so if I wanted my family to grow, I had to grow first. And I didn't learn that with 1 or 2 kids. I didn't learn that with 3 kids. I had to have 5 before I started learning that. Numbers 4 and 5, actually, I learned to relax, and I learned to lead with vulnerability, and I learned to let them in on my mess. Don't pretend that I'm all fixed up. My first 2, I have to apologize to them all the time because I'm like, I didn't know any better. I thought I could make you perfect. I thought I was perfect. Yeah. But by my 4th or 5th one, I was like, there's no way I can be perfect. There's no way I can keep up with all this. So let's just live in the messy middle, and I'll explain to you what I'm feeling at the time that I'm feeling it so that we can work through it together. And guess what? They have way better emotional regulation than I ever did at that age because they see it happening.
Both of my kids do as well, but it's same similar trajectory. I mean, that's a part of my story as well, right? They were little reflections that caused me to kind of come back. What I want to pause and honor you on, though, is, and you know this, but I want you to hear this and receive this, because it's sometimes that we don't get this feedback, especially as coaches who reflect on others. You gave your older ones a gift by your ability to communicate your intent and your now recognition of the lack of congruence in your actions and your belief systems. And even though there are now some embedded emotional triggers and behavioral patterns with them, because you facilitated and opened that, you're also now giving them permission to recognize that this is all full circle. And you're alleviating any and all burden that they may have on pointing blame towards you, because you're just claiming it and stepping into ownership. Right. And so that's a beautiful thing that many people never get the chance to hear, communicate, feel, interact with their parents on. And so regardless of whatever you did, I know you've done the best that you could in every moment. And I just want to at least allow you to know that you did this, but I want everyone to hear it as explicitly as I said it, because that is repair. Yeah. Right. That's growth. That's continuing the same pattern that you're now creating with your 4th and 5th. And you have the same ability to now open up those same real-time communications with your older ones. And now they've got the contrast to also recognize the difference. So that's the thing I get caught up with my kids is I just learned, and as much of a gift as it was, it also is one of those things that's interesting. I dealt with shame and anger that came out in my house. My kids, because of the repair that's been created, they're 9 and 10 now. They don't remember having an angry dad at all. Yeah. They don't remember ever looking at me with fear, even though I remember seeing the fear in their eyes at times when I'm like, whoa, I would never want my kid to be afraid of me. Right. And so they almost don't have the contrast that the older ones do, because they don't even remember it. Yeah. And so it's beautiful to witness what's possible right in front of us. But dude, the repair is huge. And so I just wanted to pause and make sure you heard that.
Thank you for that. That's a really positive reflection, and it is felt in the relationships that I have with my older children now that they're in college. So
yeah, I'm sure it is, because think about that. Like, dude, I'm almost 40, and I have only in the most recent period of my life started to have conversations with my parents around stuff like that. Yeah. And it's not because I didn't have the desire or attempted to have the conversation. It's that they weren't ready. Yes. Right. And that's not a bash on them, because again, it's not their fault. It's generationally inherited. It's patterned down, and we just absorb these things. It does cause disruption to be able to change that trajectory. Yeah. Now, you have mentioned that you've got 5 kids and that 2 are adopted. Mm-hmm. So I would love to understand the difference and experience that you've had with natural born versus adopted children, and how have you utilized this concept of like historical embedded trash, if you will, trash from your past and patterns that come through our family line. What difference, if any, have you seen with your adopted kids versus your natural born with what they inherited?
Both of our children that joined through adoption were infants at the time. So they joined our family right from the hospital. The thing that I think if I were to compare and contrast, I mean, there's not too many differences. It's just a little bit more observable. And so with my two children that joined through adoption, their questions on where did they come from are just more explicit, right? Because there is a tangible reason for them to want to understand that. There is an implied understanding of where the others came from, and yet they still question it, right? Mm-hmm. The other two, they'll ask me questions about some of those things, and we have the context to be able to answer the questions as they were appropriately at the right age. For the other kids, but they don't ask, like, who am I? Where did I come from? You know, they don't have to ask where they got brown eyes or where they got this sort of facial feature or this trait, but all of us have that longing inside of us to say, who am I? Right? And I would say that's the biggest distinction is it's just much, much more accessible with the two children that joined through adoption. We get into those conversations a lot. The other three, I have to kind of figure out when and how and which is the right time to speak to that little immature person that's still inside of there that needs to grow up and believe I have purpose and meaning and I'm loved and I'm secure no matter where I came from or who I came from or what color hair I have, right? So I don't have a lot of things that I would say are different in terms of their emotional needs or their psychological needs. I think it all comes down to how do you answer that question? Am I safe? Am I secure? Am I loved?
Yeah. I actually think that the singular distinction that you made is pretty powerful, right? Because it also just really highlights that when we almost take things for granted or don't have an active reason to ask certain questions, maybe we don't, right? So natural born children don't really question their origin in the same way that an adopted kid would. And even though it's the same conversations that need to be had, right? It's a much more natural progression. And really, what are they seeking on one side? It is that question on who am I, but it's that perceived pain that there was a gap or something missing or someone didn't love them or someone didn't, right? It's like, why am I here versus with who actually had me, right? And so I think that's a really powerful one. And again, those are conversations I think we all need to have. Yeah. You mentioned something really interesting there, the immature little child inside that needs to grow. And I believe that, regardless of where we get, there are elements of that little immature child inside all of us. What portions of your immature child still exist, and how does it show up in your world today?
Oh, this is like a perfectly timed question, Brian, and I'll tell you in the answer to it, but I'm so glad that you asked this because I turned 51 in November, so 51 and a half almost now. And as a coach, I've always thought, I'll find myself in conversations with other people, and sometimes I can just see that their reticence to do the hard thing. They know what the hard thing is, but there's a reticence to do it. So earlier this year, there was we get 1 million, I'm sure you do too, 1 million LinkedIn messages a day. Someone wanted to help us build our business or do whatever. And I got this, I get these occasionally from these fitness coaches. Hey, would you want to help with, want help with your physique or want help with your fitness? You're a busy person. And I usually just block all of those. I'm like, LinkedIn isn't really for solicitation. It's for, business relationships, whatever. I have a strong adverse. So I will never send one of your listeners or anyone listening to this a solicitation message on LinkedIn.
Good. You're contributing to the shift back to connecting.
And anyway, I did get one message, and this guy asked me such an intuitive question that I knew he had done some homework. And he said, are you in the optimal wellness state to serve your clients the best? Oh. He didn't use the word fitness. He didn't use the word physique. He used the word wellness. And he knew that I needed to be in a place of wholeness and fullness to be able to serve my clients the best. And it was exactly what I had been feeling. Like, I heard myself to a couple of clients say, well, what's keeping you from doing the hard things, right? And they'll come up with excuses. They'll tell me whatever. But in my own heart of hearts, one of the hard things for me was, so until I hit my growth spurt, I was short and chubby. And I got a lot of words that affirmed that chubbiness in me. You're not athletic. You don't have to wear husky jeans. You'll never make the football team or the basketball team, whatever. Well, then I grew, and I grew about a foot in a summer. And people said, well, you can play basketball, but you're so awkward and clumsy that you'll never amount to much. And you're so skinny that you'll never put on muscle, right? So as long as you're okay playing second string, as long as you're okay just pushing around the first string, you'll be okay. Those words kind of sat in my head and in my heart for a very long time. And I didn't think that they were regulating me in any sort of way. I went to CrossFit, I would work out, but I worked out so that I could eat, right? So that I didn't feel guilty about indulging every now and then. And when I did that, I got in okay shape, but I wasn't in great shape. I didn't look the part, if you will. I'm 6'3". I weighed about 200 pounds. A baggy shirt or a baggy sweatshirt would hide some of the rolls, and people still thought I was tall and thin, no muscle. And for me, there was this piece of this little boy inside of me that said, but can I still sit at the big kids' table? Do I have what it takes? This journey of entrepreneurism, the journey of fatherhood, all the stuff that you're talking about, it just kept bringing that up. And when I would hit adversity or uncertainty, I would wonder, do I have a seat at the big boys' table? Can I hang with the big boys? And so about 8 months ago exactly, I reached back out. It was a 3-month lag from the time that coach asked me that question till I got the courage to reach back out. And I said, to answer your question truthfully, no, I'm not. And I know to be a better coach, but also more importantly, to be a better human and prove to myself, I need to do something about that. And I know what I should be doing, shame. I know I should be eating differently, and I know I should be working out more, but candidly, I don't want to have to think about those things. I just need someone to provide the structure. And we set goals, we set milestones, we set progressions. He helped me program my workouts. He helped me program my macros. He helped me do all kinds of stuff. Didn't tell me what I needed to eat. Didn't shame me for when I fell off the workout wagon a little bit, or when I went on vacation and had a couple beers. He didn't shame me. He just helped me redirect back to what was important to me, like a great coach would. So fast forward, just 2 weeks ago, my wife and I took a trip to London, where these trainers are actually based. That was the first time that we've met face to face. We got a chance to do a couple workouts, throw some weight around, and then we got a chance to do some photos to prove the before and after. Like, what could I do to myself? And I tell you, this is not about vanity. It wasn't about physique. It was everything about speaking to that little wounded boy that was inside. And when I heard those other dudes, like, we walked into the workout gym and they said, okay, it's time for the photo shoot. Pop your top off, right? Took my top off, and these guys were like, where have you been hiding this? Your pictures do not show us exactly what you're showing us now. That sounds very vain when I say, oh, I want you to receive it in a way that this little boy received it. It was finally an affirmation by another man saying, you deserve a seat at the big kids' table. Look at what you've been able to do, right? And so for me, that's been one of the most revelatory things, that one of the biggest responsibilities that we have to ourselves is we can no longer look for those false substitutes. We can no longer look for the words that people are going to share with us to give us affirmation. We have to speak that to ourselves. We have to prove it to ourselves. And then the words of affirmation start coming, right? But if we don't believe it first, if we don't believe we're strong enough, or that we're not a chubby, fat little kid, or if we're not just a tall, slender beanpole that got called birdcage on spring break, right? Like, those things can be so damaging. We have to start speaking to ourselves that I am strong enough, and I can do hard things, and I was meant to do hard things. And on the other side of hard things is my existential purpose I've been wanting to find all along.
Yeah.
So
that amazing. First of all, congratulations. That's badass. The other thing I'll say is, not once while you were communicating that did I take it as vanity, right? I also appreciate why you separated that, not only for yourself, but for the listeners, but not once did I receive you that way, right? And I don't think that would even be possible to receive you that way, because you operate with so much heart, right? You are so clear and so grounded in the way that you communicate, and you've already given the distinctions around where this served in terms of love, validation, and connection in the past. This was about you showing yourself what's possible within the physical body that you've always viewed having limits.
Yes.
And putting yourself in a position where, just like in every other area of your life, that you can choose however you want to feel and look physically, just like you can spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, which I would argue you had those mastered potentially first.
Yes.
This is like your breakthrough moment on the physical side, bro. That's huge.
That's exactly how I've worded it to people. Like, every year my birthday, I tend to go away for a retreat, a solo retreat.
Mm-hmm.
And much like you said before, like I used to be around a lot of people and felt completely alone. So one of the things I wanted to do was be completely alone and not feel alone. So I went on these solo retreats, and I don't take technology and I don't take a lot of books. I just go out and walk in the woods. But every year I kind of set an intention, and I try to figure out what went well this year, what didn't go so good, what do I want to do different, how's the business going to look. I set some vision and just kind of get this kind of ethereal picture of what my desired future next year should be. And every year there's something that pops out. So, okay, spiritual growth, physical, mental growth, whatever it might be. And I'll kind of set an intention there and then work towards it, get a certification maybe if I need a little more education, or go out and be more vulnerable if I need to be that way, or whatever. And every year it's like peeling back this onion. Yet down here, somewhere so protected and so wrapped in fear and insecurity, was this thing that said, you can make your body move, but you'll never make your body look good. Right? I don't know where it came from. And candidly, I don't know. But if I just held it under the table all the time and never showed it to anyone, I was going to be sitting at that all the time. And I knew that was one of the things that had been revealed to me this year that I needed to take action on. For like, back to personal growth is the key to all growth. But I really wanted breakthrough in my business, and I wanted breakthrough in my family, and I wanted breakthrough in my marriage. But I knew if this one little thing was causing me shame, I was gonna have shame triggers all the time about it. So just punching it in the face and saying we can do it. Every time I'm throwing around weight in the gym, or every time that I didn't really want to get up at 4:30 in the morning and drag myself there, or go at 4:30 in the afternoon when I'm exhausted after a day. Like, I just kept thinking to myself, you got to prove it to that little boy, right?
Yeah. Well, I also love that you just said, just punch it in the face. I have said for a long time that these negative low frequency emotions, shame, blame, all the things that are connected to them, right? Like, they will be adversaries in constant pursuit until the day we die.
Yes.
Right. We can heal through many of them to the point that we don't get triggered anymore. But ultimately, we've got to remain vigilant in our efforts to continue to be aware and recognize when, where, and how it's affecting us, so that we can fucking punch it in the face.
Yes.
Because the reality of it is they will continue to keep us stuck if we allow them. And that is the one area where I am all for fighting through all the muck and the yuck, fighting through all the shit that no longer serves us, so that we can ultimately uncover what the little boys and little girls needed to hear, that ultimately are the treasures that we're all seeking anyway.
Amen.
Right? Like, that's what it's about, but it doesn't ever end. And however far along we are, so many people are like, Brian, do you consider yourself self-actualized? And I'm like, I'm as self-actualized as I can be in this moment. Yeah. But it's not where I hope to be as I continue to grow, right? Like, I can accept that as reality and truth, but there's no final destination, only constant evolution of self.
Amen.
And so thank you for your vulnerability and being able to share some of those historical narratives that kept you stuck. And bro, you brought it today. I would love to be asking you more questions, but I also want to be respectful of your time. So as we start to wrap up this conversation, I know that you've got an ebook that people can learn and grow through your understanding, your collective wisdom. I'd love for you to tell people where they can find that. And then if you want to wrap into that answer, kind of a collective closing thought for the theme of our discussion today for the audience to really take away from.
Yeah, so good. Well, if you want to follow this crazy journey that's called Conjunction Leadership, and a little bit of my personal story woven through there, conjunctionleadership.com is the go-to place. It has a little bit of all the formalities and a website that proves that I have a legitimate business. You can download the guide from there by clicking on the button. And the guide's called Mastering Midlife Leadership, 9 Power Moves for Executives to Stay on Top. Primarily targeted towards male executives, but it's good for everybody. You can also go to LinkedIn. That's where a lot more of my expository thoughts and the personal journey start revealing itself there. My missives and theories on leadership and what it takes to be a great leader are also there. You can click on the button there that says get the guide directly from LinkedIn as well. So, and then there is Facebook and there is Instagram. Those are there. Those are brand reputations. I don't tend to share as much of the personal story as just representatives of the brand and what we do. But I also still am belief that connections are the main and most important thing. So if you send me an email at jim@conjunctionleadership.com, you're most likely going to get a response directly from me, not my people, not my team, but just me. And so if there's anything that rattled something loose for you during this call, or you want to integrate it or talk about it, just find time, schedule a call through my page, or find time just by sending me an email. And I guess if there is a final bow that we tie around this is I got off the phone with a client today, and we've been working together for almost 2 years. And he still comes back to the same things over and over and over again, and has the awareness, but not the desire to change. And when I look at the problem from a neutral perspective, it's just fear of what will be if I step out of who I am today. And so I feel like that's where the majority of our world is living. And if there's one thing that I could give them, it's just, I have it written on my wall from when my very first retreat, when I went on it, when I didn't even know what I was going to be doing and I didn't have a name for this business. But on the other side of fear is purpose. And if you're able to step through that journey and you're proving to yourself you can do the hard things, what happens is your purpose just naturally pops out of it. And yet so many of us are walking through the world waiting for this purpose to be dropped into our lap on stone tablets or something. And in reality, it's been there all along. You just got to let enough life happen that it withers it away, and you step through the portals of doing the hard things, whatever that may be. Maybe it's getting a body transformation. Maybe it's proving to yourself you can lift heavier weights. Maybe it's having a really emotional conversation with your spouse. But when you step into those hard things, you are stepping closer and closer and closer to your purpose, because there is a thing called fear, and it will keep you back in safety. And that safety is further and further and further away from your purpose. So.
That is so beautiful, my friend. You know, I love to say that fear takes root where the light of truth is missing.
Oh, that's good.
Right. And in so many cases, right, all the greatest things in life are just on the other side of fear. It's just, how do we move ourselves through it, right? And each and every one of us is different. So, Jim, thank you for your vulnerability, your transparency, all of your wisdom, all of your heart in this conversation today. I know that people are going to walk away with perspective, understanding, direction, just by virtue of your words and your presence, my friend.
Sweet. I couldn't tell you how enjoyable this has been. So thank you for inviting me to Instagram, and thank you for inviting me here.
Dude, I love it. And for those of you that just watched Jim flip open his lid and jump in, you got to speak to that immature little boy or little girl inside of you. You have to recognize that you can and will do hard things if you give yourself permission to do so. And if you recognize that all control is ultimately designed to give you safety where you don't perceive you have it. By the way, it also points you towards exactly what's important as it relates to you being able to conjoin your life, disrupt your life, and be able to bridge and grow into exactly who you are and are meant to be. But it's going to require you to flip open your lid and scan your can. What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com.